The bullet missed Samuel Hart's head by 3 inches, and he barely flinched as he continued pouring whiskey into his tin cup beneath the relentless Montana sun. Valentine, Montana Territory, had seen worse summers than 1882, but not by much. The dust hung in the air like a curse, and Samuel sat outside the saloon watching the world move past him with all the enthusiasm of watching paint dry on a fence post. He was 26 years old and felt twice that. A man who had fought in range wars that meant nothing, loved women whose names he could not remember, and drifted from town to town carrying nothing but a worn saddle and a reputation for being quick with a gun. The second bullet embedded itself in the post beside his head, splintering wood across his shoulder, and finally, Samuel looked up with the mild irritation of a man interrupted from his drinking. "You going to return fire, Hart?" the bartender called from inside. "Depends on if they are aiming at me or just terrible shots," Samuel replied, setting down his cup with deliberate slowness. He stood, stretched, and walked into the street with the kind of confidence that came from genuinely not caring if he lived or died. The shooter was a young ranch hand from the Double J, drunk and angry about something Samuel had probably done but could not recall. The confrontation ended when Samuel simply walked up to him, took the gun from his shaking hands, and told him to sleep it off. "You did not even draw," the bartender said when Samuel returned to his seat. "Seemed like too much effort." Samuel picked up his cup again, draining it in one swallow. This was his life now, a series of meaningless days bleeding into meaningless nights, waking each dawn with nothing to look forward to except more of the same. He had no family left, no home to return to, no dreams that had not already been crushed under the weight of reality. The West was supposed to be about possibility, but Samuel had found it mostly concerned itself with survival, and even that felt optional most days. The afternoon wore on with agonizing slowness. Samuel watched a dog chase its tail in the street. He watched Mrs. Henderson haggle with the butcher over the price of beef. He watched clouds drift across the sky with the same indifference they showed the earth below. When evening finally arrived, painting the mountains purple and gold, Samuel felt nothing but relief that another day had ended. He stood, stretched again, and began walking toward the boarding house where he rented a room by the week. That was when he heard the wagon. It was moving too fast, the horses panicked and frothing, the wheels clattering over the rutted road with dangerous speed. Samuel stopped, more out of curiosity than concern, and watched as the wagon careened around the corner near the general store. The driver was hunched forward, clearly injured or ill, and the horses had the wild-eyed look of animals beyond rational control. Without thinking, which was how Samuel did most things these days, he stepped into the street. "Move, you idiot!" Someone shouted, but Samuel was already timing his jump. He grabbed the harness of the lead horse as it thundered past, letting the momentum swing him up and forward. His boots scraped the ground, his shoulders screamed in protest, but he held on and pulled himself toward the horse's head. The animal tried to shake him off, but Samuel had grown up with horses, back when he still cared about things like staying alive, and he knew how to talk them down from panic. "Easy now, easy," he said, his voice low and steady even as his body protested every jarring step. "Nobody here is trying to hurt you. Just slow down now, that is all I am asking." The horse's eye rolled toward him, white and terrified, but some part of its mind recognized the calm in Samuel's voice. He reached for the bit, got his hand around it, and began applying pressure. The second horse, sensing its partner slowing, began to slow as well. Within 50 yards they had gone from a deadly gallop to a canter, then a trot, and finally a trembling stop in front of the doctor's office. Samuel let go and dropped to the ground, his hands torn and bleeding from the leather straps. He barely noticed. The driver of the wagon was not moving, slumped forward with blood soaking through the back of their shirt. Without waiting for help, Samuel climbed into the wagon bed and carefully turned the person over. It was a woman, younger than him by a few years, with dark hair matted with sweat and blood. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow, and Samuel felt something strange stir in his chest. It might have been concern, though he was not certain he remembered what that felt like. He lifted her as carefully as he could and carried her toward the doctor's office, kicking the door open with his boot. "Doc," he called. "Need you now." Dr. Morrison appeared from the back room, took one look at the woman in Samuel's arms, and immediately began clearing his examination table. Samuel laid her down gently, stepping back as the doctor began his work. Only then did Samuel realize half the town had gathered outside, drawn by the commotion. "Who is she?" Morrison asked, cutting away the bloody shirt to reveal a deep gash across her shoulder blade. "No idea. Found her driving a runaway wagon." Samuel leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. His hands were still bleeding, dripping onto the clean floor, but he did not move to tend them. He watched the doctor work, watched the woman's chest rise and fall with each labored breath, and felt that strange stirring again. It was unsettling. "Someone robbed her from the look of it," Morrison said, examining the wound. "Cut her and took off with whatever she was carrying. She is lucky it was not deeper. Samuel, get over here and hold this cloth while I prepare the stitches." Samuel moved without thinking, pressing the cloth where Morrison indicated. The woman's skin was cold under his hands, and he found himself silently willing her to keep breathing. This was new. Usually he could not be bothered to care if someone lived or died, including himself, but something about this stranger made him feel almost human again. "Is she going to make it?" The words came out before Samuel could stop them. "If infection does not set in, next few days will tell." Morrison threaded his needle with practiced efficiency. "You can let go now. Actually, you should probably tend those hands before they get infected too." Samuel looked down at his torn palms as if noticing them for the first time. They hurt, he realized distantly. He stepped back from the table and began wrapping them with strips of cloth Morrison kept for such purposes, all while keeping his eyes on the woman. She had not opened her eyes once. Her face, now that he could see it properly in the lamplight, was striking in an unconventional way. Strong features, a small scar above her left eyebrow, lips pressed tight even in unconsciousness as if bracing against pain. "You know her, Samuel?" Morrison asked, working the needle through skin with steady hands. "Never seen her before in my life." "Then why are you staring at her like she owes you money?" Samuel did not have an answer for that. He forced himself to look away to focus on bandaging his hands, but his mind kept returning to the question of who she was and what had happened to her. It was the most interested he had been in anything for months. Morrison finished the stitches and began bandaging the wound. "She will need to stay here tonight at least. Tomorrow we will see if she wakes up and what kind of shape she is in." He washed his hands in the basin, drying them on a relatively clean towel. "You did a good thing, stopping that wagon. Those horses would have killed someone eventually." Samuel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. A good thing. He was not certain he remembered how to do those anymore. He moved toward the door, intending to leave, but found himself hesitating. "I will check back tomorrow," he said finally. "See if she woke up. Suit yourself." Morrison was already preparing bedding on a cot in the corner. "I will be here all night watching her." Samuel left before he could question why he was making plans to return. The night air was cooler now, a blessing after the brutal heat of the day, and he walked slowly back to his boarding house. His room was small and sparse, containing only a bed, a chair, and a small table. He sat on the bed without bothering to remove his boots and stared at the wall until sleep finally claimed him. For the first time in a long time, Samuel dreamed. Not the usual nightmares of violence and loss, but something stranger. He dreamed of dawn breaking over the mountains, of light spilling across the valley like water, and of waking with a reason to open his eyes. He dreamed of purpose, though he could not have said what that purpose was, only that it existed and that it was waiting for him. When he woke the next morning, the dream faded but the feeling remained. Samuel dressed, splashed water on his face from the basin, and headed downstairs. Mrs. Carmichael, who ran the boarding house, was serving breakfast to the other residents when he appeared. "Heard you played hero yesterday," she said, pouring coffee into his cup without asking if he wanted any. "The whole town is talking about it. Was not trying to be a hero, just stopped a wagon." Samuel accepted the coffee and a plate of eggs and biscuit that he had not requested. Mrs. Carmichael believed in feeding people whether they asked or not. "Still, that girl owes you her life. Doc says she would have bled out if you had not gotten her there when you did." She stood with her hands on her hips, a round woman in her 50s with more opinions than time to express them all. "No one knows who she is yet. Wagon had no identifying marks and she was not carrying any papers." Samuel ate his breakfast in silence, letting Mrs. Carmichael's chatter wash over him without really listening. When he finished, he stood and headed for the door. "Going to check on her, Mrs. Carmichael called after him. "Might as well." The morning sun was already fierce, promising another scorcher of a day. Samuel walked through the awakening town, nodding to the few people he passed but not stopping to talk. The doctor's office was quiet when he arrived, the door propped open to allow air circulation. He knocked on the frame and Morrison appeared, looking tired but satisfied. "She woke up an hour ago," the doctor said. "Weak but conscious. Still has not told me her name, though." "Maybe you will have better luck." Samuel entered slowly, his eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The woman was awake, propped up on pillows and watching him with eyes that were remarkably alert given her condition. They were brown, he noticed, dark brown like coffee or rich earth. She studied him with the same intensity he had studied her the night before. "You are the one who stopped the wagon," she said. Her voice was hoarse but steady. Seemed like the thing to do at the time. Samuel stayed near the door, suddenly unsure of himself. This was ridiculous. He had faced down armed men without hesitation, but one injured woman was making him nervous. "Thank you." She tried to sit up straighter and winced, her hand going to her bandaged shoulder. "The doctor said I would have died without your help." The doctor is prone to exaggeration. Samuel moved a little closer, drawn despite his uncertainty. "What is your name?" She hesitated, and for a moment Samuel thought she would not answer. Then she said, Beatrice Zimmerman." "Samuel Hart." He nodded at her, formal and awkward. "Do you remember what happened to you?" Beatrice's jaw tightened. "3 men. They stopped my wagon about 5 miles outside town. Said they were looking for someone, described a man I had never heard of. When I told them I did not know anything, they did not believe me. One of them cut me to make his point. I managed to get the horses moving before they could do worse." "Did you recognize any of them?" "No, but one had a brand on his saddle, a circle with a cross through it. I saw it when he passed in front of me." Her eyes focused on something Samuel could not see, reliving the memory. "They let me go after I was cut. Laughed about it, said I would not make it far anyway." Samuel felt anger stirring in his gut, hot and unfamiliar. He had not been angry, truly angry, in so long that it took him a moment to recognize the emotion. "That brand belongs to the Cross Circle Ranch, about 30 miles north of here." Big spread, owned by a man named Dalton Reed, not a pleasant fellow by any account. I do not care who owns it. Beatrice looked at him directly. I just want to get well enough to move on. I was heading to Helena to meet my brother. He has work for me there. You are in no shape to travel anywhere for at least a week, probably 2, Morrison interjected from his position by the window. That wound needs time to heal properly, and you lost a good amount of blood. You push yourself too hard too fast and you will end up dead anyway. Beatrice's frustration was visible, but she nodded. I do not have money for a doctor or a room. Already paid for, Samuel said before he could think better of it. Both Morrison and Beatrice stared at him. He shrugged. Seemed like the thing to do. I cannot accept charity, Beatrice said, her pride evident despite her weakened state. Then pay me back when you are on your feet. I am in no hurry. Samuel meant it. He had money saved from various jobs over the years, more than he needed since he spent most of his time drinking and drifting. What did it matter if he spent some of it keeping this woman alive? Beatrice studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. But I will pay you back every cent. I believe you. Samuel found himself almost smiling, which was strange enough that it felt wrong on his face. I will let you rest. Doc, let me know if she needs anything. He left before either of them could respond, stepping back into the bright morning. The encounter had lasted maybe 10 minutes, but Samuel felt different somehow. Lighter, though that did not make sense. He had simply paid a doctor's bill, nothing more. Yet as he walked back toward the saloon, where he had originally been heading before stopping at the doctor's office, he found himself thinking about Beatrice Zimmerman, about the strength in her voice despite her injuries, about the way she refused charity even when she clearly needed it, about her eyes. The saloon was quiet this early, just a few dedicated drinkers nursing hangovers from the night before. Samuel ordered whiskey but found himself not really wanting it. He stared at the amber liquid in his glass, watching light play through it, and thought about the dream he had the night before. Purpose waking beside him. What a strange idea. He had not had purpose in years, not since he was 20, and still believed the world made sense. Heard you are playing knight in shining armor these days, a voice said from behind him. Samuel turned to find Jack Morrison, the doctor's younger brother and occasional deputy, sliding onto the stool next to him. Jack was 28, married with 2 children, and one of the few people in Valentine who still tried to be Samuel's friend, despite Samuel's best efforts to discourage such things. Just stopped a wagon. People are making too much of it. Saved that woman's life from what I hear. That is something. Jack ordered coffee, which meant he was working today. You know who she is, Beatrice Zimmerman, on her way to Helena to meet her brother. Any reason Reed's men would have gone after her? Samuel looked at Jack sharply. How do you know Reed's men were involved? My brother told me about the brand she described. I am asking if you know why they would target her specifically. Jack's face was serious now, all trace of friendliness gone. Reed has been expanding his operations lately, pushing out smaller ranchers and homesteaders. Usually through intimidation, but there have been some incidents of violence. If his men are now attacking random travelers, that is a problem. She said they were looking for someone, a man. When she could not help them, they cut her for spite. Samuel felt that anger again, hotter this time. What do you plan to do about it? Me? Nothing. I am just a deputy when Sheriff Carson needs extra help, which is not often, and Reed has enough money and influence to make trouble for anyone who crosses him. Jack sipped his coffee. I am just giving you information as a friend. If you are thinking about going after those men yourself, do not. You are good with a gun, Samuel, everyone knows that, but Reed has 20 men working for him, maybe more. You cannot fight them all. I was not planning on fighting anyone. That was mostly true. Samuel had thought briefly about tracking down the men who hurt Beatrice, but only briefly. What did he care if some stranger got robbed and cut? Except he did care. For reasons he could not explain, Jack looked at him skeptically but let it drop. "Well, if you change your mind, talk to me first. Maybe we can figure something out that does not end with you dead." He finished his coffee and stood. "I need to get going. Mary is expecting me home for lunch. You should come by sometime, meet the children." "Maybe," Samuel said, which meant no. Jack knew it meant no, but he smiled anyway and left. Samuel sat alone with his whiskey, still not drinking it, thinking about violence and justice and whether any of it mattered. The answer was probably no, but Beatrice's face kept appearing in his mind, her determination to pay him back even when injured, her strength despite fear. That meant something, even if Samuel could not say what. He spent the rest of the day doing nothing in particular, which was normal for him. He walked around town, sat in the shade, watched people go about their lives. But as the afternoon wore into evening, he found his feet carrying him back toward the doctor's office. Just to check on her, he told himself. Just to make certain she was recovering properly. Morrison was changing Beatrice's bandages when Samuel arrived. She was sitting up now, more color in her face, though she still looked weak. Her eyes found Samuel's immediately. "Back again," Morrison said. "You getting paid to stand guard or something?" "Just checking in." Samuel stayed by the door, aware that he was making a habit of this and that habits were dangerous things. "I am fine," Beatrice said. "Better than yesterday at least. The doctor says I can probably move to the boarding house in a day or two once he is certain the wound is not going to get infected." "Good. That is good." Samuel shifted his weight, uncomfortable. What was he doing here? He should leave, go back to his room, drink until he fell asleep. Instead he said, "If you need anything, food or books or anything to pass the time, let me know." Beatrice's expression softened slightly. "You have done enough already, more than enough." Still, Samuel could not explain even to himself why he was offering. "The offer stands." He left before the conversation could continue, before he could make an even bigger fool of himself. The evening was cooler now, a breeze coming down from the mountains bringing the smell of pine and snow. Samuel walked without destination, his mind full of thoughts he could not organize. This was not him. He was not the kind of man who helped people, who checked on them, who offered assistance. He was the kind of man who drank alone and woke each day wishing he had not. So why was Beatrice Zimmerman changing that? The question haunted him through another restless night and into the next morning. When he woke, his first thought was of checking on Beatrice again. This was becoming a problem. Samuel forced himself to wait until afternoon before heading to the doctor's office, telling himself he was just being polite, just making certain his money was being well spent. Beatrice was sitting in a chair by the window when he arrived, reading a book that Morrison had loaned her. She looked up as Samuel entered, and something like pleasure crossed her face before she could hide it. "Mr. Hart," she said formally. "Miss Zimmerman." Samuel nodded, equally formal. "You are looking better. I feel better. The doctor says the wound is healing cleanly. Another few days and I should be able to move around more freely." She set the book aside. "I have been thinking about what you did, stopping those horses. That could not have been easy. I have done harder things." Samuel moved closer, drawn by something he could not name. "Besides, seemed like you would have done the same for me if our positions were reversed." "I like to think I would have." Beatrice studied him with those dark eyes. "The doctor tells me you are something of a mystery in town. That you showed up 6 months ago and have not told anyone much about yourself." "Not much to tell. I have been drifting since I was 20, taking jobs where I can find them. Valentine seemed as good a place as any to rest for a while." Samuel surprised himself by continuing. Though resting implies you have somewhere you are trying to go and I do not. I just exist from one day to the next. That sounds lonely. It is what it is. Samuel had never admitted the loneliness before, not even to himself. The word hung between them, honest and raw. Beatrice nodded slowly. I think I understand that. After my parents died 3 years ago, I tried to keep the farm running myself. Worked from sunrise to sunset every day, barely made enough to survive. Finally, I had to admit defeat and sell what little was left. My brother offered me a position keeping books for his freight company in Helena, so I sold everything and started traveling. But the journey has been difficult. The West is not kind to women traveling alone. It is not kind to anyone, male or female. Samuel pulled up a chair and sat without asking permission. What happened to your parents? Fever. Swept through our county in Wyoming one winter, took half the settlers with it. I nursed them as long as I could, but in the end there was nothing to be done. Her voice was steady, but Samuel could hear the grief underneath it. I buried them on our land before I sold it. At least they are together. I am sorry. The words felt inadequate, but Samuel meant them. He understood loss perhaps better than most. Thank you. Beatrice shifted in her chair, wincing slightly at the movement. What about you? Do you have family somewhere? Parents died when I was young. Grew up on various ranches, whoever would take me in and give me work. Learned to ride, to shoot, to survive. Never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home. Samuel was sharing more than he had shared with anyone in years, and he could not seem to stop. Got involved in some range disputes when I was younger, fought for whoever paid me. After a while I realized it was all pointless, that I was risking my life for other people's land and pride, so I stopped. Been drifting ever since. That does sound pointless, Beatrice agreed, but you are still young enough to change direction, find something worth caring about. Like what? I do not know, but there has to be something. She smiled, and Samuel felt that strange stirring in his chest again. Otherwise, why bother getting out of bed each morning? That is the question, is it not? Samuel found himself almost smiling back. This was dangerous, this connection he felt forming. He should leave, should go back to his solitary drinking and drifting, but he did not move. He sat and talked with Beatrice for another hour, about nothing and everything, and when he finally left, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt alive. The pattern continued over the next several days. Samuel would wake, force himself to wait a few hours, then find his way to the doctor's office. Beatrice grew stronger each day, able to move around more freely, the color returning fully to her face. They talked about their pasts, their dreams, the places they had been and the places they wanted to go. Samuel found himself looking forward to these conversations, planning things to tell her, questions to ask. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. On the 5th day, Morrison declared Beatrice well enough to move to the boarding house. Samuel helped her gather the few belongings that had been recovered from her wagon and walked with her the 3 blocks to Mrs. Carmichael's establishment. The older woman took one look at Beatrice and immediately began fussing over her, showing her to a room on the 2nd floor with a good window and a comfortable bed. "You will be right across the hall from Mr. Hart, Mrs. Carmichael said, shooting Samuel a knowing look that he pretended not to see. "Very convenient. Thank you," Beatrice said, either missing or ignoring the implication. "This is lovely." Samuel excused himself, retreating to his own room before Mrs. Carmichael could say anything else embarrassing. He sat on his bed and stared at the wall, trying to understand what was happening to him. He was Samuel Hart, the man who cared about nothing and no one. Yet here he was, his heart racing because Beatrice Zimmerman was sleeping across the hall from him. This was madness. But it was the best he had felt in years. That evening, Mrs. Carmichael insisted Beatrice join everyone for dinner in the common room. Samuel usually took his meals alone in his room, but he found himself sitting at the large table with the other boarders, pretending he was there for the food and not just to be near Beatrice. She sat across from him, laughing at something old Mr. Peterson said, and Samuel felt that strange stirring again. It was becoming familiar now, this warmth in his chest, this desire to see her smile. After dinner, Samuel found himself walking Beatrice back upstairs, despite the fact that her room was literally next to his, and the journey took approximately 15 seconds. "You do not have to escort me," Beatrice said, amusement in her voice. "I think I can manage 3 steps to my door without getting attacked. Just being careful." Samuel knew he sounded ridiculous. Those men who cut you are still out there somewhere. In Valentine, that seems unlikely, but Beatrice did not seem displeased by his protectiveness. "Still, I appreciate the concern." They stood in the narrow hallway, neither moving toward their respective doors. The moment stretched, filled with unspoken words and uncertain feelings. Finally, Beatrice said, "Thank you again, Samuel, for everything. I know I keep saying it, but I mean it. You saved my life, and you have been kind to me when you had no reason to be." Maybe I had a reason. The words came out before Samuel could stop them. Maybe I needed someone to save as much as you needed saving. Beatrice's eyes widened slightly. "What do you mean?" Samuel took a breath, committing to honesty even though it terrified him. "Before I met you, I was barely living, just going through the motions, waiting for something to matter again. Then you showed up, bleeding and determined and refusing to give up, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to care about something, to want to wake up in the morning." "Samuel," Beatrice said softly, and the way she said his name made his heart stutter. "I am not good at this," he continued, the words tumbling out now. "I have not cared about anyone in so long I barely remember how, but I care about you, Beatrice. More than I should, probably. More than makes sense given we have only known each other a week. But there it is." Beatrice stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "What if I told you I care about you too, that these past few days talking with you have been the best days I have had since my parents died? I would say we are both probably fools." But Samuel was smiling now, really smiling for the first time in years. "Then we can be fools together." Beatrice reached out and took his hand, the one that was still bandaged from stopping her wagon. "If you want to be, I want to be." Samuel squeezed her hand gently, careful not to hurt her. "More than I have wanted anything in a long time." They stood like that for another moment, holding hands in the dim hallway, before Beatrice finally stepped back toward her door. "Good night, Samuel." "Good night, Beatrice." Samuel went to his room and lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling and marveling at the strange turn his life had taken. 1 week ago he had been a man without purpose, drifting through existence with no direction and no hope. Now he had a reason to wake up, a reason to try, a reason to imagine a future that included more than just the next drink. Purpose had indeed woken beside him, though not in the way he had ever expected. The next morning, Samuel woke early for the first time in months. He washed, shaved, put on clean clothes and went downstairs feeling like a different person. Beatrice was already there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and a plate of eggs. She looked up as he entered and smiled, and Samuel felt warmth spread through him. "Good morning," she said. "Morning." Samuel sat beside her, accepted coffee from Mrs. Carmichael, and realized he was happy. Actually, genuinely happy. It was a strange sensation. They spent the morning walking around Valentine together, Beatrice moving slowly because of her healing wound but determined to see the town. Samuel found himself pointing out landmarks, telling stories about the people they passed, acting like a tour guide when he had never particularly cared about Valentine before. But he cared now, because Beatrice was interested, and that made it interesting. They were passing the general store when a rider came thundering into town, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. He pulled up in front of the sheriff's office and dismounted in a hurry, disappearing inside. Samuel felt unease prickle at the back of his neck. "That did not look good," Beatrice said. "No." Samuel watched the sheriff's office, waiting. A few minutes later, Sheriff Carson emerged with the rider and Jack Morrison. They stood talking urgently, Carson's face grave. Jack spotted Samuel and waved him over. "Wait here," Samuel told Beatrice and crossed the street. "What is happening?" he asked. Carson was a man in his 50s, tough as boot leather and twice as stubborn. He looked at Samuel with something like approval, which was unusual. "Got word from the Parker Ranch about 15 miles west. Reed's men hit them last night, burned their barn, and threatened to do worse if they do not sell their land. Ben Parker is refusing to back down, but he only has his wife and 2 sons to defend the place. Reed has 20 men at least. What are you going to do?" Samuel asked, though he already knew the answer. "Not much I can do. Reed has not technically broken any laws I can prove. Parker could file charges, but by the time we got a judge out here and a trial set up, Reed will have already driven them off their land one way or another." Carson spat into the dust. "I hate this, but I am one man with 1 deputy. We cannot take on Reed's whole crew." Samuel felt anger building in his chest, hot and righteous. This was exactly the kind of pointless violence he had grown tired of years ago. Powerful men crushing weaker ones just because they could. He had told himself he did not care anymore, that he was done fighting other people's battles. But looking at Carson's frustrated face, at Jack's obvious desire to help, Samuel felt something shift inside him. "What if you had more than 1 deputy?" he heard himself say. Carson looked at him sharply. "You offering to join up, temporarily, just until this situation with Reed is resolved?" Samuel knew he was being a fool, but he could not stop himself. Purpose, it seemed, came with responsibilities. "You know he will come after you specifically once he finds out you are standing against him," Jack warned. "Reed does not forget slights, and he has enough money to hire real killers if he wants to. Then I guess I better be faster than them." Samuel was surprised by how calm he felt. A week ago he would not have cared if Reed burned down every ranch in Montana. Now he cared, because Beatrice had been hurt by Reed's men, and because people like the Parkers deserved better, and because somewhere along the way Samuel had remembered that the world only changed if people were willing to fight for it. "All right then." Carson stuck out his hand and Samuel shook it. "Welcome to the law, at least temporarily. Jack, get him a badge. We ride out to Parker Ranch this afternoon, make it clear that they have official protection now. Maybe that will make Reed think twice." Samuel returned to where Beatrice was waiting, her expression concerned. "What is going on?" he explained the situation as they walked back toward the boarding house. Beatrice listened quietly, her face thoughtful. When he finished, she said, "You do not have to do this. It is not your fight." "I know, but I want to." Samuel stopped walking and turned to face her. "A week ago I would have let Reed burn down the whole territory and not blinked. But you changed something in me, Beatrice. You made me remember that some things are worth fighting for, worth caring about. And if you get killed," her voice was tight with worry, "then at least I will die for something that matters." Samuel reached out and touched her face gently. "I am not going to die. I am too stubborn for that, but I have to do this. You understand?" Beatrice nodded slowly. "I do. I do not like it, but I understand." She caught his hand and held it against her cheek. "Just promise me you will be careful." "I promise." They stood like that for a moment longer before Samuel forced himself to step back. He had preparations to make, and Carson wanted to ride out that afternoon. He walked Beatrice back to the boarding house, kissed her forehead in a gesture that felt both natural and terrifying, and went to gather his things. His gun belt hung on a peg in his room, dusty from disuse. Samuel strapped it on, checking the revolver out of habit. The weight felt familiar on his hip, a reminder of who he had been. But he was different now, he reminded himself. He was not fighting for money or because he had nothing better to do. He was fighting to protect people who could not protect themselves, and to stop men like Reed from terrorizing honest families. That made all the difference. Carson, Jack, and Samuel rode out to Parker Ranch in the early afternoon, arriving to find the family cleaning up the remains of their burned barn. Ben Parker was a man in his 40s, lean and weathered, with the kind of toughness that came from years of hard work. His wife Martha was equally tough, organizing her 2 teenage sons in salvaging what they could from the wreckage. "Sheriff," Ben said, shaking Carson's hand. "Thank you for coming, but I am not sure what you can do." Reed's men came in the middle of the night, set the fire, and were gone before we could even get our guns. No way to prove it was them, though we all know it was. That is where we might be able to help. Carson gestured to Samuel and Jack. "I have deputized these men to provide protection for families Reed is targeting. If his men come back, they will be met with force, and I will have witnesses to back up any charges we file." Ben looked at Samuel with new respect. "I know you. You are Samuel Hart, the one who saved that woman from the runaway wagon. Heard you were fast with a gun. Fast enough." Samuel did not particularly like his reputation, but if it helped here, he would use it. "We appreciate the help," Martha said, wiping soot from her face. "But you need to understand what you are getting into. Reed wants our land because it has water rights for Copper Creek. If he controls the creek, he controls half the grazing land in this valley. He will not stop until he gets what he wants." "Then we will make sure he does not get it," Samuel said with more confidence than he felt. "How many men does he have?" Last count was about 22 working his ranch, plus he has been hiring drifters and gunslingers. Could be as many as 30 now. Ben shook his head. "You 3 cannot fight 30 men." "We will not have to fight them all at once," Carson said. "Most of those men are cowboys, not fighters. They will scatter if things get serious. It is Reed's inner circle we need to worry about, maybe 5 or 6 real dangerous men." They spent the afternoon discussing strategy and security. Samuel found himself falling back into old habits, thinking tactically, considering approaches and defenses. It was familiar but different now, because he actually cared about the outcome. By the time they rode back to Valentine, it was dark and Samuel was exhausted in a way he had not been in years. Physical exhaustion from work, yes, but also mental exhaustion from caring, from planning, from hoping. Beatrice was waiting in the common room when he returned. She stood immediately, relief visible on her face. "You are all right." "I am fine. We just talked today, established that the Parkers have official protection now." Samuel wanted nothing more than to collapse into bed, but he also wanted to talk to Beatrice, to reassure her that he was not going to do anything foolish. They sat together in the corner while Samuel explained the day. Beatrice listened carefully, asking intelligent questions, offering suggestions. She was not just worried, Samuel realized. She was engaged, thinking about the problem with him. It made him feel less alone. "You should get some sleep," Beatrice said eventually. "You look exhausted." "I am." Samuel stood, offering his hand to help her up. They walked upstairs together, their hands still linked. At her door, Beatrice turned to face him. "Samuel, I know we have only known each other a short time, but these past few days have meant everything to me. You have meant everything to me." She took a breath. "So please be careful. I only just found you and I do not want to lose you." "You will not lose me." Samuel pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her carefully to avoid her healing wound. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked under his chin. "I promise you, Beatrice, I am not going anywhere." They stood like that for a long moment before finally separating. Samuel forced himself to step back, to go to his own room, though every instinct told him to stay with her. But they were not there yet. Rushing would be wrong. So he went to his room alone, lay on his bed, and thought about the future for the first time in years. The next week passed in a strange combination of tension and happiness. During the days, Samuel worked with Carson and Jack, riding out to check on the Parker ranch and other families Reed was pressuring. They had 2 more incidents, both times arriving in time to chase off Reed's men before serious damage was done. Reed himself stayed out of sight, running his operations from his ranch, but his presence was felt in every threat and every act of intimidation. But the evenings belonged to Samuel and Beatrice. They took meals together, walked through town as the sun set, talked for hours about everything and nothing. Samuel found himself sharing stories he had never told anyone, dreams he had thought long dead. Beatrice opened up as well, talking about her childhood, her parents, her hopes for the future. They grew closer each day, the connection between them deepening into something real and lasting. 2 weeks after Samuel had stopped her runaway wagon, he finally kissed her. They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Beatrice was telling a story about trying to teach her father to read when she was 10, laughing at the memory. Samuel was not really listening to the words, too caught up in watching her face, the way her eyes lit up when she laughed, the way she gestured with her hands. When she finished the story and turned to him, still smiling, Samuel simply leaned forward and kissed her. Beatrice stilled for half a second, then kissed him back. It was gentle and sweet and perfect, and when they finally pulled apart, Samuel felt like his heart might burst from his chest. "I have been wanting to do that for days," he admitted. "I have been wanting you to do that for days," Beatrice replied, her smile soft and genuine. They kissed again, longer this time, and Samuel felt the last pieces of his old self finally fall away. He was not the drifter anymore, the man without purpose or hope. He was Samuel Hart, deputy of Valentine, Montana Territory, and he was in love with Beatrice Zimmerman. It was terrifying and wonderful and more than he had ever thought possible. The happiness could not last forever, though. 3 weeks after the barn burning, Reed made his move. Samuel was in the sheriff's office reviewing reports with Carson when a boy ran in, breathless and terrified. "Mr. Parker sent me. Reed's men are coming, maybe 15 of them, all armed. Said they were going to finish what they started." Samuel and Carson were moving before the boy finished speaking, grabbing rifles and extra ammunition. Jack joined them from his rounds, and the 3 men rode hard for Parker Ranch, pushing their horses to the limit. Samuel's mind was racing, calculating odds and tactics. 15 men was more than they had faced before. This was going to get violent. They arrived to find the Parker family barricaded in their house, shots already being fired from both sides. Reed's men had surrounded the building, using the remaining outbuildings for cover. Samuel could see immediately that the situation was desperate. The Parkers could hold out for a while, but eventually Reed's men would set fire to the house, and that would be the end. "We need a plan," Carson said, pulling his horse behind cover. "We cannot just charge in." "We split up," Samuel said, his old tactical instincts taking over. "Jack, you circle around to the east, create a distraction. Sheriff, you stay here and provide cover fire. I will come in from the west, Take out as many as I can before they realize what is happening." "That is a good way to get yourself killed," Jack objected. "You have a better idea." Samuel was already dismounting, checking his weapons. "We need to break their concentration, give the Parkers a chance to push back. This is the fastest way to do it." Carson looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you be careful, Hart. You die on me and I will be very annoyed." Samuel almost smiled. "Would not dream of it." He moved quickly through the brush, using every bit of cover the landscape provided. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. This was what he used to be good at before he gave up caring. Apparently he had not lost the skills, just the motivation. Now he had motivation in abundance. He thought of Beatrice waiting in town, worried about him. He thought of the Parker family huddled in their home, terrified. He thought about bullies like Reed who thought money and guns gave them the right to destroy people's lives. Samuel reached his position on the west side of the property, behind a water trough that provided decent cover. He counted 8 men from his angle, all focused on the house. Taking a breath, he opened fire. The first 2 men went down before anyone realized what was happening. The third turned toward Samuel just in time to catch a bullet in the shoulder. Then chaos erupted. Reed's men were shouting, trying to figure where the attack was coming from. Jack opened up from the east, adding to the confusion. The Parkers, recognizing their opportunity, increased their fire from the house. Samuel reloaded with practiced efficiency, selecting targets and firing with cold precision. He did not think about the men he was shooting, did not consider their lives or families. They had made their choice when they agreed to terrorize innocent people. Now they were facing the consequences. One of Reed's men spotted Samuel's position and returned fire, bullets splintering the water trough. Samuel dropped flat, rolled to a new position, came up firing. The man went down. Another charged at Samuel's position, screaming and shooting wildly. Samuel waited until he was close, then put a bullet through his leg. The man fell, cursing. The fight lasted maybe 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. When the shooting finally stopped, 7 of Reed's men were down, wounded or dead. The rest had scattered, running for their horses and disappearing into the growing darkness. Samuel stayed behind cover for another minute, making certain it was really over, then stood slowly. "Samuel," Jack was running toward him. "You hit." Samuel looked down at himself, surprised to realize he was not sure. But no blood, no pain beyond a few scrapes from diving behind cover. "I am fine. The Parkers, they are all right, some broken windows, but everyone is safe." Jack was staring at Samuel with something like awe. "I have never seen anyone shoot like that. You took down 5 men in less than a minute." Samuel felt sick suddenly, the adrenaline fading and leaving him shaky. He had just killed or wounded multiple people. It did not matter that they were trying to hurt others, did not matter that he had no choice. He had still ended lives, and that weight settled onto his shoulders like a physical thing. Carson was checking the downed men, determining who was wounded and who was dead. 4 dead, 3 wounded badly enough they would not be fighting again anytime soon. The wounded men would be taken to town, where Morrison would patch them up before they were charged with attempted murder. The dead would be buried. "Reed will not let this go," Ben Parker said, emerging from his house with his family. Martha was crying with relief, holding her sons close. "He will come back, and next time it will be worse." "Let him come," Samuel said, finding his voice again. "We will be ready." They spent the night at Parker Ranch, taking turns on watch to ensure Reed's men did not return. Samuel sat in the darkness, his rifle across his knees, and thought about the path his life had taken. 3 weeks ago he had been ready to drink himself to death. Now he was in a shooting war with one of the most powerful men in the territory. It was insane, but when he thought of Beatrice, of the life they might build together if he could just get through this, it all made sense. Purpose. He had found it, or it had found him, and now he could not imagine going back to his old empty existence. Dawn came slowly, painting the mountains gold and pink. Samuel stood and stretched, his body aching from the previous day's exertions. Carson and Jack were already awake, making coffee over a small fire. "We need to end this," Carson said without preamble. "Reed is not going to stop, and we cannot protect every family in the territory. We need to go after him directly." "You are talking about arresting him. On what charges?" Jack asked. "Conspiracy to commit murder, for starters. We have wounded men who can testify that Reed ordered them to drive the Parkers off their land by any means necessary." Carson poured coffee into tin cups, handing one to Samuel. "It will not be easy. Reed will lawyer up, might even get off eventually. But it will tie him up in court long enough for these families to get organized, maybe hire their own security." "He will have guards at his ranch," Samuel said. "We cannot just ride in and arrest him without starting another war." "Then we get smart about it." Carson smiled grimly. "Reed has to come to town eventually, conduct business, visit his lawyer. We wait for him here, arrest him in public where he cannot fight back without making himself look guilty." It was a good plan, as good as they were likely to get. They rode back to Valentine that morning, bringing the wounded prisoners with them. Morrison was shocked by the amount of work he suddenly had, patching up men who had been trying to kill the Parkers the night before. But he was professional, treating everyone regardless of what they had done. Samuel headed straight for the boarding house as soon as they were back in town. He needed to see Beatrice, to reassure himself that she was all right, that the world still contained something good and pure. She was in her room, and when she answered his knock, her eyes went wide. "Samuel, you are covered in dust and gunpowder, and is that blood?" She pulled him into her room, closing the door quickly. "What happened?" He told her everything, sitting on her bed while she cleaned the scrapes on his face and hands. She listened without interrupting, her face pale but determined. When he finished, she said, "You could have died. But I did not. This time. What about next time or the time after that?" Beatrice's hands were shaking. "I cannot lose you, Samuel. I know I have no right to ask you to stop. You are doing what you think is right. But I am terrified every time you ride out that you will not come back." Samuel took her hands in his, holding them steady. "I am terrified too, but I have to see this through. Reed cannot be allowed to keep terrorizing people. And after it is done, after he is arrested and tried, I will hang up this badge and never put it on again. I promise you that." "What will you do instead?" Beatrice asked softly. "I have been thinking about that." Samuel pulled her closer, so she was sitting beside him on the bed. "I have money saved, enough to buy a small piece of land. Start a horse ranch maybe, something peaceful. Build a life that does not involve guns and violence." "That sounds wonderful." Beatrice leaned her head against his shoulder. "But that is your dream, Samuel. What about me? Where do I fit in this future you are planning?" Samuel's heart was racing. This was it, the moment he had been both anticipating and dreading. "That depends. Would you want to fit in? Would you want to build that life with me?" Beatrice pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Are you asking what I think you are asking? I know it is too soon. We have only known each other a month. But I love you, Beatrice. I loved you from the moment I saw you in that wagon, even though I did not know it yet. I loved you when you woke up and refused charity. I loved you when you smiled at Mrs. Carmichael's terrible jokes. I love you now, and I will love you tomorrow and every day after." Samuel was talking too fast, the words tumbling over each other, but he could not stop. "So yes, I am asking, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me once this mess with Reed is over?" Beatrice's eyes were wet with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes, of course yes. I love you too, Samuel. I think I have loved you since you bandaged your hands and stayed by my bedside when you could have just walked away." Samuel kissed her then, deep and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to give you a good life, Beatrice. I swear it. No more drifting, no more violence. Just us and horses and a quiet place to grow old together. I believe you." Beatrice kissed him again, softer this time. "But first you have to survive this business with Reed. Promise me you will be careful." "I promise." They sat together for a long time, holding each other, neither wanting to let go. Outside the window, the town went about its business, unaware that two lost souls had found each other and decided to build something beautiful out of the wreckage of their pasts. The next 2 weeks were tense. Reed did not come to town, staying on his ranch and sending his remaining men to conduct business on his behalf. Carson was frustrated, wanting to end this before more violence erupted. Samuel spent his days on patrol with Jack, checking on the families Reed had targeted, making certain everyone was safe. The nights he spent with Beatrice, planning their future together. They decided to keep the engagement quiet for now, until the situation with Reed was resolved. But Samuel felt different knowing she had agreed to marry him. He felt anchored, connected to the world in a way he had never experienced before. Every morning he woke with purpose, and every night he fell asleep grateful for another day alive. Reed finally made his move on a Tuesday afternoon. He rode into Valentine with 10 men, all heavily armed and headed straight for his lawyer's office. Someone ran to tell Carson, and within minutes the sheriff, Samuel, and Jack were positioning themselves outside the lawyer's building. "Remember, we do this by the book," Carson said quietly. "Reed is smart. He will try to provoke us into doing something stupid. We stay calm, we rid him the charges, we arrest him. Any violence that happens is on him." Samuel checked his gun, made certain the hammer was loose in its holster. He did not want violence, but he would be ready if it came. Beatrice's face flashed through his mind, her smile, her laugh, the way she said his name. He had too much to live for now to take stupid risks. They waited until Reed emerged from the lawyer's office, flanked by his men. Carson stepped forward into the street. "Dalton Reed, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and multiple counts of attempted arson and assault." Reed stopped, his face darkening. He was a man in his 50s, tall and powerfully built despite his age, with the kind of arrogance that came from years of getting his way. "On whose testimony?" "On the testimony of 3 of your men who we arrested 2 weeks ago after they attacked Parker Ranch. They are willing to testify that you ordered them to drive the Parkers off their land by any means necessary, including violence." Carson's voice was steady and loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "Now, you can come quietly and let the courts sort this out, or you can resist and make things much worse for yourself." Reed looked at the 3 lawmen, calculating odds. Samuel could see the moment he decided to call their bluff. "I do not think so, Sheriff. Those men are liars trying to save their own skins. You have no real evidence, and every politician in the territory will be at my trial supporting me. You really want to do this?" "I do not want to, but I will." Carson's hand moved closer to his gun. "Last chance, Reed. Come peacefully or do not, but you are being arrested today." For a long moment nobody moved. The street had gone quiet, everyone watching to see what would happen. Samuel's heart was pounding, his body tense and ready. He did not want to kill anyone else, but he would do what was necessary. Then Reed smiled, cold and calculating. "All right, Sheriff. I will come with you. No sense in anyone getting hurt over a misunderstanding." He unbuckled his gun belt with exaggerated slowness, handing it to one of his men. "I am certain this will all be cleared up very quickly." Carson moved forward to put handcuffs on Reed, and that was when everything went wrong. One of Reed's men, a young hothead Samuel recognized from the Parker Ranch fight, suddenly drew his gun. "Nobody is arresting Mr. Reed. Stand down." Carson shouted, but it was too late. The young man fired, his shot going wild but close enough to make people scatter. Samuel drew without thinking, years of training taking over, and shot the gun out of the man's hand. The man screamed and fell back, clutching his bleeding fingers. Then Reed was moving, shoving Carson aside and running for his horse. His other men drew their weapons, some firing at the lawman, others just trying to cover Reed's escape. Samuel dropped behind a water trough, Jack beside him, returning fire with desperate precision. He saw Reed reach his horse, saw him mount and turn the animal toward the edge of town. Samuel did not think. He ran into the street, drawing a bead on Reed's retreating form. He could end this right now. One shot and Reed would fall and the threat would be over. His finger tightened on the trigger. And then he stopped. Reed was not shooting at anyone. He was just running. If Samuel shot him in the back, he would be no better than the men he was trying to stop. It would haunt him forever, would poison everything he was trying to build with Beatrice. So Samuel lowered his gun and watched Reed disappear, knowing he had just made things infinitely more complicated. The firefight ended as quickly as it started. With Reed gone, his men lost their will to fight. They surrendered, throwing down their weapons. Carson was furious, a cut on his head bleeding freely but alive. Jack was unharmed. 2 of Reed's men were wounded, including the one Samuel had shot. "Why did you not take the shot?" Carson demanded once order was restored. "You had him dead to rights. He was running away." "I am not shooting anyone in the back." Samuel holstered his weapon, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "We will get another chance. Maybe, or maybe he is already halfway to Canada." Carson wiped blood from his face, wincing. "But I suppose you did what you thought was right." Cannot fault a man for that. They spent the rest of the day processing Reed's men, taking statements, documenting everything for the eventual trial. Samuel went through the motions mechanically, his mind elsewhere. He kept seeing Reed riding away, kept wondering if he had made the right choice. What if Reed came back with more men? What if people died because Samuel had hesitated? Beatrice found him that evening, sitting on the porch of the boarding house and staring at nothing. She sat beside him without speaking, just being present. Finally, Samuel said, "I could have ended it today. Reed was right there and I could have shot him, but I did not." "Why not?" "Because he was not a threat in that moment. He was just a man running away. And I did not want to be the kind of person who shoots people in the back, even when it is legally justified." Samuel looked at her. "Did I do the right thing?" "I think you did the only thing you could do and still be the man I love," Beatrice said softly. "Samuel, you are not a killer. You are a good man who has been forced into bad situations. If you had shot Reed in the back, it would have changed you, made you into something you are not. I am glad you did not take that shot. Even if it means Reed is still out there, still a threat, even then." She took his hand. "We will find another way. You, Sheriff Carson, Jack, all of you together. You will find a way to stop him that does not require you to become something you hate." Samuel pulled her close, grateful beyond words for her faith in him. They sat together as the sun set, planning and hoping and dreaming of a future where Reed was in prison, and they were free to build their life together. Reed did not go to Canada. He went to the territorial governor, armed with lawyers and money and political connections. Within a week, word came down that all charges against Reed were being dismissed due to insufficient evidence. The testimony of his men, who were facing their own charges, was deemed unreliable. Reed was returning to his ranch a free man. Carson was livid, pacing his office like a caged animal. This is why people take the law into their own hands, because the actual law is bought and paid for by men like Reed. "So what do we do?" Jack asked. "We cannot arrest him again without new evidence, and we cannot protect every family in the territory forever." Samuel had been thinking about this problem for days. What if we do not have to protect them? What if we help them protect themselves? Both men looked at him. "What do you mean?" Carson asked. "Reed's power comes from intimidation. He has more men and more guns than any single family, so they feel helpless. But what if they were not single families? What if they organized, pooled their resources, hired their own security?" Samuel was working through the idea as he spoke. "We could help coordinate them, train them to defend themselves. Make it so attacking any one family means fighting all of them together." Carson stroked his jaw thoughtfully. "That could work. Reed is ruthless, but he is not stupid. If the cost of getting what he wants is too high, he will back off and find easier targets elsewhere." They spent the next 2 weeks organizing the families Reed had targeted. The Parkers, the Johnsons, the Hendersons, 3 other homesteading families, all agreed to band together for mutual protection. They set up a system where any attack would be met by men from all the families, turning what had been a series of easy targets into a unified resistance. Samuel and Jack trained them, taught them to shoot and fight and work together. Reed tested them once, sending men to threaten the Johnson family in the middle of the night. Before the attack could escalate, riders from the other families arrived, 15 armed men appearing out of the darkness. Reed's men retreated without firing a shot. After that, the harassment stopped. Reed had apparently decided these families were more trouble than they were worth. The crisis was over. Samuel turned in his badge the next day, thanking Carson for the opportunity, but making it clear he was done with law work. Carson understood, shaking his hand and telling him he had done good work. Jack promised to stay in touch, to let Samuel know if Reed tried anything else. With that chapter of his life closed, Samuel began planning his future in earnest. He found a piece of land for sale 10 miles outside Valentine, 100 acres with a creek running through it, and good grazing for horses. The price was reasonable, and Samuel had enough saved to buy it outright with money left over for building a house and buying his first horses. He proposed to Beatrice properly this time, on one knee in the evening sunset, with a simple gold ring he had bought from the jeweler in town. She cried and said yes again, and they set a date for 1 month later, giving them time to build at least a basic house on the property. The next month passed in a blur of activity. Samuel hired men to help him construct a small 2-room cabin with the promise of expansion later. He bought 4 horses as breeding stock, good animals with solid bloodlines. He worked from dawn until dusk, pouring every bit of energy into creating something permanent, something that would last. Beatrice was equally busy, preparing for their wedding and their new life together. She had been corresponding with her brother in Helena, explaining the change in plans. He was supportive, even sending money as a wedding gift. Mrs. Carmichael organized the entire town to help with the wedding, decorating the small church and preparing food for the celebration afterward. The wedding day arrived on a clear September morning, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. Samuel stood at the altar in his best clothes, which were still not very impressive, and watched Beatrice walk down the aisle. She wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Carmichael had helped her make, and she looked more beautiful than anything Samuel had ever seen. They spoke their vows in front of the whole town, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When the preacher finally said Samuel could kiss his bride, Samuel did so with his whole heart, sealing their promise before God and everyone they knew. The celebration afterward was joyous, full of music and food and dancing. Samuel, who had not danced since he was a boy, found himself spinning Beatrice around the floor, laughing at his own clumsiness. She did not seem to mind, her eyes shining with happiness. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Samuel and Beatrice slipped away to their new home. The cabin was small but solid, with a bed Samuel had built himself and a fireplace that actually worked. They stood in the doorway together, looking at what they had created, and Samuel felt a sense of peace he had never known. "This is it," he said. "Our life, our future." "Our purpose," Beatrice added, smiling up at him. "You told me once that you woke each day without purpose and I became your purpose. But you are wrong, Samuel. You were always my purpose too, I just had not found you yet." Samuel kissed her then, deep and passionate, and carried her across the threshold into their new home. They had both spent years lost and alone, drifting through a harsh world without direction. But they had found each other, and in finding each other they had found themselves. The West was still harsh, still unforgiving, but they would face it together. That made all the difference. The years that followed were good ones, full of hard work and quiet happiness. Samuel built his horse ranch from the ground up, gaining a reputation for breeding quality animals and treating them well. Beatrice managed the books and correspondence, turning what could have been a modest operation into a genuinely profitable business. They expanded the cabin into a proper house, adding rooms as they could afford them. 2 years after their wedding, Beatrice gave birth to their first child, a son they named James after Samuel's father. Samuel had never known he could love someone so instantly and completely. He held his son for the first time and felt something fundamental shift inside him. He was no longer just a husband, he was a father, and that came with responsibilities and joys he was only beginning to understand. James was followed 3 years later by a daughter, Emma, who had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn streak. Then came another son, Thomas, and finally another daughter, Margaret. The house that had once been a 2-room cabin became a sprawling family home, filled with noise and laughter, and the controlled chaos that comes with raising 4 children. Samuel never touched a gun again after his wedding day. He hung his revolver on the wall as a reminder of who he used to be, but he never wore it or used it. When neighbors had disputes, they came to him for advice, not for his gun. He became known as a fair man, someone who could be trusted to do the right thing. It was a reputation he was proud of, one he worked hard to maintain. The trouble with Reed never entirely went away, but it became manageable. Reed eventually died of a heart attack 5 years after Samuel's wedding, and his ranch was sold off piecemeal to settle his debts. The families he had terrorized finally had peace, and the valley settled into a comfortable routine of cooperation and mutual support. Samuel kept in touch with Jack Morrison, who eventually became sheriff after Carson retired. They met once a month to play cards and complain about how fast their children were growing. Samuel visited the Parker Ranch occasionally, watching Ben's sons grow into fine young men who had no memory of the fear their parents had once lived with. But most of his time was spent with Beatrice and their growing family. He taught James to ride when the boy was 5, putting him on a gentle mare and watching with pride as his son found his balance. He taught Emma to read, sitting with her every evening and sounding out words until she could read entire books on her own. He played with Thomas and Margaret, building forts from blankets and telling them stories about the ranch and the horses. Every morning Samuel woke beside Beatrice, and every morning he felt grateful for the life they had built. She was as beautiful to him at 40 as she had been at 23, maybe more so, because now her beauty came with history and shared experience. They had weathered difficulties together, celebrated triumphs together, raised children together. They had built something real and lasting. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Beatrice back to Valentine for dinner at the town's only restaurant. It was a rare evening away from the children, who were being watched by Mrs. Carmichael and two of her granddaughters. They sat across from each other in a quiet corner, holding hands across the table. 20 years, Beatrice said, her voice full of wonder. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. I know what you mean. Samuel rubbed his thumb across her knuckles, a gesture that had become habitual over the years. Sometimes I think about that day when your wagon came tearing into town. What would have happened if I had not stepped into the street, if I had just stayed on that porch drinking? But you did not. You stepped into the street, you stopped the horses, you saved my life. Beatrice smiled. And in doing so, you saved your own life too. We saved each other, Samuel. We did. Samuel felt emotion welling up, the kind of profound gratitude that comes from truly understanding how lucky you are. You gave me purpose, Beatrice. You gave me a reason to wake up every morning. You gave me everything. And you gave me a home, a family, a life I never dreamed was possible. Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes intense. I love you, Samuel Hart. I loved you at 23 and I love you at 43 and I will love you when we are both old and gray. We are already starting to go gray, Samuel pointed out, running a hand through his hair where silver was beginning to show at his temples. Beatrice laughed. True, but you wear it well. They finished their dinner, reminiscing about the years behind them and dreaming about the years ahead. Their oldest, James, was 17 now, already showing interest in taking over the ranch someday. Emma was 14, brilliant and determined to become a teacher. Thomas was 11, obsessed with horses like his father. Margaret was 8, the baby of the family, though she hated being called that, and full of fierce independence. We did all right, Samuel said as they walked back to the boarding house where they were staying for the night. Mrs. Carmichael had insisted, offering them their old rooms across the hall from each other. 4 healthy children, a successful ranch, a good life. We did all right. We did better than all right, Beatrice corrected. We built something beautiful together. They spent that night in the same boarding house where they had fallen in love, in the same rooms where they had first shared their dreams. And in the morning, when Samuel woke, his first sight was of Beatrice sleeping beside him. Even after 20 years, the sight still filled him with that same sense of purpose, that same certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. They returned to the ranch the next day, back to their children and their responsibilities and their quiet, happy life. The years continued to pass, marked by graduations and weddings and the eventual arrival of grandchildren. James married a girl from a neighboring ranch and gave Samuel and Beatrice 3 grandchildren in quick succession. Emma became a teacher as she had always wanted, moving to Helena but visiting regularly. Thomas took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, working alongside his father until Samuel felt comfortable stepping back. Margaret was the wanderer of the family, the one who reminded Samuel most of himself in his younger years. She wanted to see the world beyond Montana, to have adventures and experience things. Samuel understood that need, and he never tried to hold her back. He just made certain she knew she always had a home to return to when she was ready. Samuel Hart lived to see his 70th birthday, a milestone he had never expected to reach back in his drifting days. He was surrounded by family that day, by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Beatrice, still beautiful to him despite her gray hair and the lines around her eyes, sat beside him throughout the celebration. They held hands like young lovers, and when people toasted to his health and long life, Samuel felt nothing but gratitude. He had started as a man without purpose, drifting from town to town and waiting for death. Then Beatrice had appeared, bleeding and determined, and everything had changed. She had become his purpose, and in becoming his purpose, she had given him a life worth living. They had built something together, something that would outlast them both. Their children would carry on the ranch, would tell their own children about Grandpa Samuel, who saved Grandma Beatrice from a runaway wagon. And the family would continue. Purpose woke beside him every morning in the form of the woman he loved and the life they had created together. And when Samuel Hart finally closed his eyes for the last time at 73, surrounded by everyone he loved, he did so knowing he had lived well. He had found his purpose, and he had fulfilled it. Beatrice lived another 5 years after Samuel passed, staying on the ranch and helping Thomas with the business. She spent her days with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, about the wild early days of Valentine, about love and purpose, and building a life worth living. When she finally joined Samuel in the cemetery outside town, the entire valley came to mourn. She had been loved and respected, a pillar of the community, and her loss was felt by everyone who had known her. But the story did not end there. James continued running his own spread, passing it to his children in time. Emma taught for 40 years, influencing hundreds of students. Thomas built the Hart Ranch into one of the most respected horse operations in Montana. Margaret eventually returned home after her adventures, settling down with a husband she met in California and adding her own branch to the family tree. The cabin that Samuel had built with his own hands was preserved, turned into a sort of family museum. His old gun, the one he had hung on the wall and never touched again, was displayed there along with his deputy badge and various photographs and mementos. Generations of Harts grew up hearing the story of how their family began, of a cowboy without purpose who found purpose in the form of a dark-eyed woman with a runaway wagon. The story became legend, passed down through the decades. And while the details might have been embellished over time, the heart of it remained true. Samuel Hart had been a man without direction, drifting through life with no hope and no purpose. Then Beatrice Zimmerman had appeared, and everything changed. She became his purpose, and he became hers, and together they built something that lasted long after both of them were gone. Purpose did not arrive once and disappear. It woke beside them every day, in the choices they made and the love they shared and the family they raised. It was there in the hard work of building a ranch, in the joy of holding a newborn child, in the quiet contentment of growing old together. Purpose was not a destination but a journey, one they walked together from that first moment in a dusty Montana street until their final breaths. And if you were to visit the Hart Ranch today, more than 100 years later, you would still find horses running across those same fields. You would find descendants of Samuel and Beatrice still working the land, still honoring the legacy their ancestors built. You would find the old cabin preserved, a reminder of humble beginnings and the power of love to transform lives. The story of Samuel and Beatrice Hart became woven into the fabric of Valentine, Montana, a reminder that purpose can be found even in the darkest times. That love can heal even the deepest wounds. That two lost souls can find each other and build something beautiful in the harsh landscape of the West. They had both been broken when they met, both adrift in a world that seemed determined to crush them. But they had found each other, and in finding each other, they had found themselves. The cowboy who expected dawn without purpose discovered that purpose could wake beside him every day in the form of the woman he loved and the life they built together. And that, in the end, was the greatest legacy they left behind. Not the successful ranch or the large family or the respect of their community, though those things mattered. The greatest legacy was the simple truth that love gives life meaning, that purpose can be found when you least expect it, and that every dawn holds the possibility of transformation if you are brave enough to step into the street and grab hold of what matters. Samuel Hart had been brave enough. So had Beatrice Zimmerman. And because of their courage, because of their love, generations that followed had the foundation and inspiration to live with purpose and hope. The story of a runaway wagon and a man who stopped it became the story of a family, a community, and a love that conquered the harsh realities of the Wild West. Every morning brings a new dawn. For most of Samuel's early life, those dawns had been empty things, marking another day of meaningless existence. But after Beatrice, every dawn brought purpose. Purpose in the work to be done, in the family to care for, in the life to be lived fully and well. Purpose did not arrive once and stay forever unchanged. It had to be chosen, renewed, recommitted to with each new day. And Samuel and Beatrice chose it, every morning for the rest of their lives. They chose each other, chose their family, chose the hard work and quiet joys of building something meaningful. That choice, repeated daily, became the story that defined them and inspired everyone who came after. The Wild West was a place of hardship and violence, of broken dreams and crushed hopes. But it was also a place where people could reinvent themselves, where a cowboy without purpose could become a loving husband and father, where a woman fleeing violence could become the foundation of a dynasty. It was a place where dawn always came, offering the chance to start again, to choose purpose over emptiness, to build something worth keeping. Samuel and Beatrice Hart took that chance. They grabbed it with both hands and never let go. And in doing so, they proved that even in the harshest landscape, even in the darkest times, love and purpose could flourish. All it took was courage, commitment, and the willingness to step into the street when a runaway wagon came thundering past. That was how legends were born. That was how families were founded. That was how two broken people became whole, and how purpose learned to wake beside them every day, faithful and true, from that first morning until their last.